Welcome, everybody, to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas. Man, bye weeks are upon us. We got Atlanta, Chicago, Green Bay, and Pittsburgh on bye this week. Injuries are upon us. Malik Nabers and Tyreek Hill are out for the season. Bucky Irving and Trey Benson are dinged up. The 49ers are day-to-day. We're going to give you players to start because you got to fill in the gaps here in Week 5, and we're going to help you out with a look at the waiver wire. Before we get to that, hello, Dave Richard and Jamey Eisenberg. I'm Adam Aizer, by the way, for those of you who don't know. You just read the name, I think, there. But for those of you who are 4-0, congratulations. How many 4-0 teams do you guys have?
3 or 4?
Let's see.
Do you have time to count them all? Aren't you in like 30 leagues?
Several. Let's see. 1, 2, 3.
I'm curious how you keep track. Do you have a spreadsheet with all of your records?
Right there.
Let me see. Oh, yeah, look at you. Excel spreadsheet.
4.
Formulas going crazy.
6.
I did not expect an Excel spreadsheet from JB.
No, me neither. I would have lost a lot of money on that. Good for you.
Yeah,
I am impressed.
Super high tech for you. All right, guys. Top 3 waiver wire priorities at any position. Dave Richard, go first.
Woody Marks has to be number 1. You got to love what you saw from him with the increased opportunities and the production that came with them against Tennessee last week. He is going to be the Texans' best running back rest of season and a number 2 fantasy running back for your fantasy squad. Darius Slayton is next up for me. This is the Giants' replacement. I'm going to use that term loosely when it comes to Malik Nabers because not quite the same kind of impact that Malik Nabers has had, but I think Darius Slayton will see a ton of playing time and a good amount of targets just as he has in the past. And then the third name on my list is Darren Waller. 2 touchdowns for the Dolphins, only 4 targets. Dolphins didn't throw that much against the Jets, but I think they will throw a little bit more, and I do think that Darren Waller will see a lot of targets for however long he's healthy.
Yep. Jamey, how about you? Your top 3?
Same exact 3. I think Mark's in a great spot. Darius Slayton has a big opportunity in front of him, and so does Darren Waller. So hopefully this is an opportunity for you to get these players and, look, fill some holes because of the 4 teams on a bye, fill some holes because of injuries, and in the case of Darren Waller, just fill the hole at a position that we know we've been chasing really since the end of time. So I think just the case for Waller and his chance now to maybe be Jonnu Smith, maybe to be a part of what Tyreek Hill's absence is going to mean for the Dolphins, but there's a big chance for him to step up and help fantasy managers in a big way.
But the trouble that we're having right now with the waiver wire is we don't know the status of Bucky Irving and we don't know the status of Trey Benson. And that's why we're going to start, instead of quarterbacks this week, we're going to start with running backs to look for on the waiver wire. And Woody Marks, look, we know the status there. We got an update on Joe Mixon. He's nowhere near returning. He may not play at all this season. So I don't think you have to really worry about Joe Mixon right now. You just have to worry about Woody Marks and Nick Chubb. And Woody Marks appears to be making some serious progress in that backfield. So if we talk about our favorite running backs, and you think about Rachaad White, who is about 45% rostered on ESPN, Yahoo, and Sleeper, almost 80% rostered on CBS. Shout out CBS. Way to go, guys. Rachaad White would be a big priority, but Sean Tucker is available everywhere. So, Jamey, let's talk about let's start with the Buck situation and who you would like if Bucky Irving were out. What would that backfield look like, and where would you rank those waiver wire options amongst the rest of the group?
Rachaad White would be my favorite because I think his role in the passing game is locked in. And so we'll see if Sean Tucker, what role he plays, because we saw last year, Week 6 against New Orleans, he had 14 carries, he had 136 yards rushing and a touchdown, 3 catches, 56 yards and a touchdown. That was with White not playing. Bucky Irving was really just starting to get going as more of a featured option for Tampa Bay, also had 14 carries and had a big game against the Saints as well. So clearly they like Sean Tucker, and we've heard throughout the offseason that he might be getting more work. Well, so far he hasn't done anything. Understandably so, because Bucky Irving and Rachaad White have been very solid. White only has the one good game. It was Week 2 against Houston. So there's a chance that this could be his best game of the season. But this is a guy for 3 straight seasons, 50 receptions in each year. His yards per carry have gone up each of the last 2 seasons, and he scored 9 total touchdowns each of the last 2 years. So I think he's going to be the guy that they trust first. He'll definitely be the guy that they trust on obvious passing downs. And so I think just given that role and given the opponent, because Seattle's not easy to run on, so Tucker will be more of a flex. Rachaad White will be more of a number 2 running back, and he'll be right there in the same sort of range as Woody Marks, because Marks not necessarily guaranteed to be the full-time guy without Nick Chubb taking work. Nick Chubb's going to still get his opportunities to touch the ball as well. So I don't think it's all of a sudden Woody Marks backfield and only Woody Marks backfield.
And here's the other thing. I don't think there will be a huge rush for either of the Bucs running backs unless we learn throughout the day on Tuesday or whenever your waivers run that Bucky Irving is going to miss time. So if you're a Bucky Irving fantasy manager and you're hearing what we're talking about and you're going, oh my gosh, like I didn't even know that he was seriously hurt, and you want to go and do something about it, you probably won't have much of a problem getting to one or both of those running backs because the rest of your league won't prioritize Bucky, or not Bucky, but Rachaad White or Sean Tucker unless we get the news that Bucky's going to miss some time. So as long as that doesn't happen, you should have a clear pathway to get those guys cheaply onto your roster.
Okay, and then, Dave, if we talk about the Cardinals situation, if Trey Benson were to miss time, what do you think happens there? You know, last year, James Conner missed only one game, and Michael Carter was the lead running back. But Amari DiMercato was not healthy for that game. He did not play in that game. So I don't know what it would look like. You know, what do you think? I just put in bids for both of those guys in one of our leagues, small bids. But I actually am prioritizing Michael Carter. How about you?
I get where you're coming from on that. I think it's a backfield that would have a lot of uncertainty. But because they seem to prefer having one running back working those passing downs, the third downs, that type of role, I think DiMercato would get that role. And we might see a rotation between DiMercato and Michael Carter on the rushing downs. But to your point, you'd rather have the running back that's going to get more carries and still pick up some catches along the way and maybe even be the short yardage goal line guy. I don't know if Carter really profiles as that guy, but that could be how the Cardinals use him. So it would make sense that if there's a world where Trey Benson is out, Michael Carter would get more opportunities.
Okay, Jamey, Kenneth Gainwell, pardon me. Kenneth Gainwell, here's another little PSA for you. If you are using CBS and you go to the player stats page and you're looking for free agents, now you have to factor in the bye weeks. Kenneth Gainwell is not going to be in any of the projections because they have a bye week. So that goes for all the players that are on bye. If you don't want to miss those players, you can sort by season projections. You can go to the most added page. You can go to the most rostered page and just find players that aren't going to be in the week 5 projections. Because if you go to the player stats page, the first thing you're going to see is week 5 projections. You're not going to see a guy like Kenneth Gainwell. How big of a priority is he for you, Jamey?
He's a big priority. You know, I mean, looking at what he just was able to accomplish against a pretty good Vikings defense. You know, best rushing performance for the Steelers running back, Steelers backfield so far this season. So you got the answer you were looking for. Okay, no Jaylen Warren. Would it be a mix of Kenneth Gainwell and Caleb Johnson? Yes, Johnson got 6 carries, but this was the Kenneth Gainwell show. We know that they like him on passing downs. He's been doing that in tandem with Jaylen Warren, obvious passing downs, third down situations. And so he passed the test. And I think the big concern would be is, okay, did he take the job from Jaylen Warren if you're the Jaylen Warren fantasy manager? The worst case scenario is, are they going to use both guys in tandem, and we get this sort of frustrating situation that we kind of had really during the last 2-3 years of Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren, where they were both at best flex plays. So I hope that's not what we're looking at right now, because Jaylen Warren gave you, 3 weeks of solid number 2 fantasy production, number 2 running back fantasy production, and Kenneth Gainwell obviously took off in the game that Warren was there. So ideally, it's just Warren goes back to being the starter, Kenneth Gainwell goes back to being the backup, the handcuff, the emergency guy that if Warren misses time again, you're going to be great. But listen, if Warren is out in week 6 and beyond because his knee injury is more serious than they let on, then you have a starting running back in Kenneth Gainwell for as long as he's given that opportunity. So he's a must-prioritize, must-add running back going into this week's waiver wire.
And it's especially for those fantasy managers that are in good shape. And I don't know how many of those there are out there. It might be 50% of everybody in fantasy football. That's still a lot of people. If there's a guy on your bench, and we're going to talk about guys that you can move on from, but somebody who you're definitely not starting this week or moving forward, replace that guy with Kenneth Gainwell and see what happens.
If we could bring up that list again of the waiver wire priorities, and we see names like Justice Hill, Tyjae Spears, Chris Rodriguez. Dave, you look at this list here, Kendre Miller, Rico Dowdle. There's also handcuffs, and there's Brashard Smith, and there's Xavier Scott, who is getting that passing role there. So any names that you think you're being putting claims in for?
I want to put 2 names on your mind here, and this is more long-term. It's Chris Rodriguez with the Commanders, and it's Kendre Miller with the Saints. Don't feel good starting any of these guys this week. So if you need a running back for this week, they're not necessarily for you. But I think there's going to come a time, I think we're already seeing it with the Commanders, where Chris Rodriguez is the primary running back. It kind of stinks because we were hoping that it would be Bill Krosky-Merritt, and it still might be. But for now, it's Rodriguez. You could stash him on your bench, and you could see if he ends up outplaying Krosky-Merritt over the course of the next few weeks. And then with Kendre Miller, certainly the 1B back in New Orleans, but we've seen his playing time go up. He finally had double-digit PPR points last week. Alvin Kamara looks okay. He's just not getting the same type of opportunities. And if the Saints are going to continue to lose games, they might trade Alvin Kamara. And if they do that, that'll mean full-time work for Kendre Miller. So it's a long-term play. If you put Kendre Miller on your bench, you're going to have to wait a long time to really see the payoff, but the payoff could be pretty good because he's looked good so far this year.
Okay, some quarterbacks. Anybody need a quarterback this week? We're going to tell you after this break who you could pick up. Are we still going with Tua Tagovailoa even without Tyreek Hill? That's next on Fantasy Football Today. Jordan Love and Caleb Williams are among the quarterbacks that you will have to replace this week, as we do have 4 teams on bye. Obviously, injuries as well. We might not be able to start Brock Purdy. You might not want to start Brock Purdy anyway. They have the Thursday night game and a lot of injuries. So welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. Adam, Dave, and Jamey here. Going through the quarterbacks. All right, let's throw up that list of Jamey's favorite quarterbacks on waivers. And I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to be controversial. I disagree. Sam Darnold. I thought about this. He is going to outscore Tua, Mariota, and Dart combined, Jamey. And if he does that, I am taking next week off, and you have to host all my shows. What do you think?
That would be fine. I was going to say, like, if they do that, you should shave your eyebrows and really make a statement. But I think there's...
That's why would I punish myself for having a great call?
Well, that's what should happen if you're wrong.
It's not going to happen, so congratulations. But I think in the case of Tua, Mariota, Dart, and Darnold, let's take Mariota out. In the case of Tua, Dart, Darnold, and maybe even Bryce Young, like, they all have the chance to be between 18 and 20 fantasy points, and that's where Darnold has been. His best game so far is just shy of 21 fantasy points on the season. He's averaging 25 passes per game. Yes, he could certainly turn things around against Tampa Bay with the injuries that they're dealing with, and if Tampa Bay's offense shows up and we get this potential shootout. But I just don't know if Seattle wants to operate at that level. So I think these guys are all sort of in a similar range. I would love Tua if he had a healthy Tyreek Hill. That's not the case. I would love Jackson Dart if he had a healthy Malik Neighbors. That's not the case. Mariota, again, is in a different category simply because even without Terry McLaurin, he can still get to 20 fantasy points. He does have a tough matchup against the Chargers, but I think there's still a lot to like about him. So if you're just looking at it, okay, I need a 1-week potential scenario, and if I miss on Mariota because Daniels is back, then I'll pivot to Darnold or I'll pivot to Bryce Young because I do think that the other 2 guys, in the case of Tua and certainly Dart because of the hype, those guys will probably get added first. But listen, you could probably pick up one and pivot to one of the other guys if you do need a quarterback for this week, understanding that there are, again, 4 teams on a bye, 2 quarterbacks, like you mentioned, in Caleb Williams and Jordan Love, who have been, for the most part, universally started. And let's not forget, Lamar Jackson may not play this week because of his hamstring injury, so there is at least one manager in every league looking at the quarterback position off waivers.
And Dave, what do you think about quarterback this week? Who do you like?
Mariota's my favorite if I knew that he was going to play, but the fact that Jaden Daniels practiced last week and is probably going to practice again this week probably takes him off the list. And I don't know if I necessarily love anybody long-term on this list, and that includes Jackson Dart. And it's really because Neighbors is out for the season for the Giants. If he were still playing, then maybe I'd want Jackson Dart on my bench rest of season just to see what happens. So if we're taking it week to week, yeah, I would probably prioritize Tua and Dart. Tua's matchup statistically isn't great. Carolina's defense did look bad against the Patriots last week. Drake May had a very efficient game. Didn't really throw the ball a lot. I could see Mariota having a fraction of that type of game, but still be somewhere between, like Jamey said, 18 to 20 fantasy points. Dart actually is taking on a Saints team that's allowed at least 20 fantasy points to every quarterback they've taken on this year. They don't get a lot of pressure on the quarterback. The Giants' offensive line, I thought, played well last week, and Dart will run a little bit. So it's pretty close for me between Tua and Dart for a 1-week quarterback in week number 5. If I'm weighing them long-term, though, I think I'd have to lean Dart over Tua, but it's really close.
Probably not the week to be thinking long-term, just guessing. I don't know that we have any of these guys that are really going to change our fantasy team. I was actually thinking if there were, you guys might laugh at this. Get ready to laugh. Hold your sides. One quarterback out there on waivers that I feel like maybe could be good long-term is J.J. McCarthy. I feel like he's been judged very, very harshly by the first 2 starts of his career. But we've seen the success that quarterbacks have had in this system. We've seen Carson Wentz just put up a couple of good fantasy games, or at least last week. He threw enough to do it. The week before, he didn't throw that much. But I'm not picking up quarterbacks this week, really. But if there were one guy that I would stash, I feel like, what do you guys think about that call? J.J. McCarthy being counted out too soon?
He's definitely being counted out too soon. I would be surprised if he plays this week, because why would you throw him out there against the Browns? They have their bye next week, so give him a couple of weeks to get sort of settled with an ankle injury and make sure he's back to being 100%, especially with the offensive line being banged up right now. Now, to your point, Adam, we have yet to see him with his full complement of receivers because he did not play with Jordan Addison, so I think that's a big boost to, obviously, any quarterback that's there, whether it's McCarthy or Wentz. I really thought you were going to go with Michael Penix because, coming from the game that he just had, another guy that's on a bye that has some, I still think, long-term appeal. We had one great game from him in week 1. We had a solid game from him in week 4. 2 stinkers in the middle there, so we'll see what kind of quarterback we get there. But I think in the case of both those guys, 2 second-year quarterbacks, 2 guys that didn't get a lot of starts clearly in their young careers so far, and great receiving options around them when everybody's healthy. So if you are looking at it from that perspective, certainly you could put them in the same category. But I think Dart belongs there also. Look, 54 yards rushing. The thing that was concerning to me is he took a lot of hits in that game against the Chargers. And the upcoming schedule is disastrous, especially in the short term when you got Philadelphia twice and Denver in between. Nobody in one quarterback leagues, even if he has a great game against the Saints, should be trusting him. It would be the definition of fool's gold because of New Orleans' defense. So long term, if we're saying McCarthy, Penix, and Dart is a distant third for me.
Okay, yeah, he had 10 carries for 54 yards and a touchdown. He also has a sore hamstring, but he's going to be fine, Jackson Dart. But, yeah, he did take a bit of a beating. They're going to have to throw the ball a little bit more than that.
He's got to get it out faster.
What about all right, well, here's my case for Darnold, by the way, just in case anybody wants to hear it. Yeah, Jamie's right. He hasn't thrown enough passes, 26 pass attempts last week. He did have one game with 33 passes, but teams have to throw on the Bucs. They have faced nothing but run-heavy offenses so far, and all of those offenses had a much higher pass rate in the week that they played Tampa Bay than for the full season. Tampa Bay has a great run defense. Tampa Bay has a good offense. They should score. Hopefully this will be the most points the Seahawks defense gives up so far this year, and you get the most pass attempts from Darnold, who's tied for the league lead in yards per attempt with Lamar Jackson. But honestly, hopefully you have quarterbacks that have more upside, because it doesn't seem like there's a ton of upside on the waiver wire. If we just look at schedule, one guy's got Miami and Dallas in the next 2 weeks, the 2 best matchups, and that's Bryce Young. Does anybody have any faith in Bryce Young?
It's hard to have faith in Bryce Young. The matchup is great. It's literally the only reason why you can start him this week or next week, and maybe you should think about him if your quarterback has a bye in week number 6. But he really just has not played great over the balance of the season, and the numbers kind of show that. So unless you really believe that the matchup is so favorable that he can go out and be a top 12 quarterback, and it's possible, that's how bad the Dolphins secondary is, then Bryce Young's somebody who could be on your list, but not necessarily first on your list.
And I will say this, though. You think about the 4 quarterbacks who have faced the Dolphins so far this season. You're looking at Josh Allen was one of them, clearly one of the best in the NFL. We got the surprise performance, but maybe give some credit to Daniel Jones, just the way that he's playing in week 1. Drake May is another guy that's done a very good job so far this season. Mm-hmm. And Justin Fields is obviously going to do a lot of things with his legs that Bryce Young just doesn't do. So there's a great chance here, but we are talking about 4 of the better fantasy quarterbacks so far this season, whereas Bryce Young has 1 good game so far this year. It took him 55 pass attempts against the Cardinals to have a decent fantasy outing. I doubt he's throwing that much against the Dolphins unless the Dolphins offense just completely comes out and dominates in the beginning part of that game.
So to be fair, it was a really good outing for Bryce Young, but it had to do with a big fourth quarter rush. Other than that game, 12.3 or fewer fantasy points per game. Darnold's been right around 18, 19 each of his last 3.
All right, let's play a quick game of Who Has More?
Oh, yes.
Okay, but
love this game.
It's really just subjective. There's no right answer here.
Oh.
Who has more upside? Bryce Young or Tua or Mariota or Dart or Darnold this week?
Mariota.
Mariota would have the most.
Okay. And Jamie, let's finish this segment with a little Superflex talk. If I'm in a Superflex league, who am I looking at?
Well, The one who I think is guaranteed to play that's out there is Cooper Rush. Now, Spencer Rattler might be available to you in your leagues. Joe Flacco might be available to you in your leagues. But let's assume just most competitive Superflex 2-quarterback leagues, those guys are rostered because they've been starting in the NFL for the first 4 weeks of the season. I think in the case of Cooper Rush, we saw some good moments from him in 2024 with the Dallas Cowboys when he stepped in for Dak Prescott. This team right now just seems so fractured. Their offensive line is a mess. The defense is a disaster. And they're facing a Texans defense that's obviously been awesome so far despite their 1-3 record. So I don't want to trust Rush. I think you want to look at Dylan Gabriel just in the case of maybe the Browns making a quarterback change. That's nothing that's guaranteed yet, so you'd be speculating there. And then there is a chance Mac Jones could start for the 49ers, but we're talking about a gimpy Mac Jones because he's dealing with a knee injury, on top of the fact that George Kittle still can't play for one more week. Ricky Pearsall may not play Thursday night. Juwan Jennings may not play Thursday night. Jones, one great game in week 2, one mediocre game in week 3. I don't know if I want to trust Mac Jones. So it could be ugly if you're just looking for desperation options between Rush and Mac Jones, and maybe again Spencer Rattler. If Rattler's available, he'd be my favorite of the guys that rostered in 10% of leagues or less.
All right, listen, we need wide receivers. We lost Malik Neighbors. We lost Tyreek Hill. We're struggling here. So who do we get on the waiver wire in 2 games without Neighbors last year? Slayton and Robinson both had at least 20 targets. So we'll talk about them and other wide receivers to pick up when we come back on Fantasy Football Today. All right, welcome back, everybody. Let's get into the wide receivers. But first, let's get into some news. The Baltimore Sun reporting that Lamar Jackson is unlikely to play this week. And Jonathan Jones of CBS reporting that Brock Purdy is unlikely to play this week. And Dave Richard, what's your reaction to those 2 headlines?
Well, obviously people were starting both of those guys, but especially Lamar Jackson. It just makes the quarterback ad drops all the more significant. Imagine if you were a fantasy manager and you had Lamar Jackson and Malik Neighbors on the same team, or Tyreek Hill with Lamar Jackson. You're going to have a lot of work to do to get your lineup right. You might have to make a trade. We can help you with that on CBSSports.com. But ultimately, going back to that quarterback talk that we had in the prior segment, very important for multiple fantasy managers this week.
Is this good or bad or indifferent, I guess, for Derrick Henry?
It can't be good. You know, you're talking about an offense that, you know, really struggled against the Chiefs. And when they are trailing, and with their defense being what it is right now, and that offense could struggle against a very good Texans defense, like Derrick Henry tends to come off the field way too much. So it's why we said Justice Hill is somebody to prioritize, because he could be a flex, especially with what he's done in the passing game the last 2 weeks. So yes, it's bad for Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry is not a top 12 running back for me. He's barely inside the top 20 for me in this matchup against Houston.
Derrick Henry in 6 losses last year, and none of them were by more than 7 points. This includes the playoffs. He averaged 15 carries per game, which is not what we're used to seeing, and only 13.5 PPR fantasy points per game for Derrick Henry, which is not bad, but it's not Derrick Henry. All right, to the wide receivers, and let's start with Darius Slayton here. First of all, if Slayton and Wan'Dale Robinson were both available, you would select which Giants wide receiver?
I would take Wan'Dale first if it's full PPR, otherwise Slayton.
I would take Slayton first. I just think there's more upside.
Okay, so Slayton is our top priority. You know, how does he compare to Woody Marks? Give me a fab percentage for both of them.
Marks would be the one you want to get first just because of the position that he plays. You know, we're talking about several receivers that hopefully will be available, might be able to help you. If Marks takes off as the lead guy for the Texans, like, you don't find those guys very often. Right. So Marks is somebody that I think we're looking at anywhere from 25% to maybe all of your fab budget, depending on what your record is. Darius Slayton has a great opportunity here, but Malik Washington might be just as good as Darius Slayton with his opportunity. Isaiah Bond might be just as good as Darius Slayton. Like, there's no guarantee with a rookie quarterback that just showed you he wants to run a lot that Slayton is going to necessarily be guaranteed to be Malik Neighbors. It's more based on what we saw last year in 2 games, what Slayton has done throughout the course of his career when getting an opportunity. But again, it's just a little bit more of a wild card for me.
I am in a league, Adam, with fab dollars being used as free agency, and Malik Washington went for 59% of fab, and Darius Slayton went for 13% of fab. I don't think it's going to end up being that way in most leagues. I think you'll see Darius Slayton in that 15 to 20% range. I think Woody Marks is going to end up being north of 60%. There's going to be at least one person in every league that goes hard after Woody Marks, knowing that they have a potential number 2 running back rest of season.
So I'm guessing Marks was rostered in that league.
He was already rostered, yes.
Dave is in a league that runs waivers before every other league. It's like, you might as well, I forgot who asked me. I was trying to explain fantasy football to my friend who doesn't play. It's like, what happens if someone gets hurt on Sunday? Is it just, you have to get their replacement? Is it just first person to get to their computer or something? Like, no, we don't do it like that
There
anymore.
are leagues that are like that, though.
There are leagues where if you've got that app open everywhere you go.
Oh man, that was the beginnings of fantasy football for me. All right, so here's the full list of wide receivers to look at. Are you making fun of me? I didn't hear.
No. I agree. I remember those days.
Darius Slayton, Romeo Doubs, Jalen Coker. I look at Jalen Coker being available. I go, why didn't I just put him on an IR spot? What was wrong with me?
I tried to tell you and everybody that for like 3 straight weeks.
I said at the beginning of the season,
it was easy decision.
Yeah, I don't think he's necessarily going to be your savior or anything.
Adam, you can do that. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you can do that with Jalen McMillan or even Christian Watson if you so choose, if you've got IR spots in your league. And it's a free ad.
Or Tyjae Spears.
Well, yeah, sure, that works too because he isn't off of IR yet.
How do we feel overall about this group that I'm looking at here?
We've been through this cycle for the last basically 3 weeks of guys who have sort of flashed and not done much the following week. Think about Troy Franklin after week 2, did nothing in week 3. Trey Tucker in week 3, did nothing in week 4. Like, this is going to be these type of receivers. Now, the difference would be is that Malik Washington is going to step into a role. Darius Slayton's going to step into a role. It's not like they were already in established spots on their rosters and just kind of got a week full of targets and then disappeared the following week. So the thing about spending a ton of fab on these guys is you just may be wasting it. But at the same time, we're dealing with 4 teams on a bye where a lot of great wide receivers are not playing. We're dealing now with 2 of the best receivers in the NFL and in fantasy that are out for the rest of the year, on top of the fact we don't know when CeeDee Lamb's coming back, when Mike Evans is coming back, when Terry McLaurin's coming back. Like, this is a position that has been completely decimated by injuries and now bye weeks. And so if you're trying to fill spots, especially if you're 1-3, right? Is that one? Yeah. 1-3, 0-4. Your 2-2 team is really struggling right now. Guillotine leagues that are dealing with injuries that you got to spend to try and get these guys. Like, you have to sort of maybe overspend for some of these receivers just to get you to the next week, because if you go 1-4 or 0-5, your interest level just fades and you're not going to be paying as much attention. And that fab money is not going to help you when you're out of playoff contention. So if you have to overspend a little bit to make sure you get one of these players, again, this is the priority. If you're just looking at it right now, Romeo Doubs is not going to help you. Jalen Coker may not help you. So we're talking about Darius Slayton. We're talking about Io Manor. We're talking about Marvin Mims, another guy coming off a big game. Is he going to do it for the second week in a row? Hard to say. But Washington and Slayton in particular, they have paths now to a lot of playing time. It's just not guaranteed. The reason I like Slayton the best, certainly more so than Washington, Washington's on a team that still has Devon Achane and Jalen Waddle and now potentially Darren Waller. Like, it's not going to be easy for him. Slayton can walk onto the field for the Giants, and all of a sudden he's the best receiver for Jackson Dart. We don't find that very often, especially at this position.
I'm more excited about Slayton than I was about the top waiver wire receivers. I think the last few weeks, the guys you mentioned, the Franklins and the Tuckers and whatnot, and even like a Kayshon Boutte or something like that, who I bought into. But yeah, because it is a different opportunity. However, I think we need maybe to pay more attention to Io Manor. Calvin Ridley was dealing with an injury. This has to be a long-term play. You can't expect Io Manor to just go in your lineup or anything like that. But, Cam Ward is struggling, taking a lot of sacks. If he could turn it on in the second half of the season, it feels like Io Manor is going to be his guy. It might just be, Dave, an Io Manor of time.
I can't believe I laughed at that.
Because it was funny.
It was funny. I guess that's why I laughed at it. And I think you might be the last man laughing if you get Io Manor, because he could eventually evolve not just into the best target getter in Tennessee, but one of the better rookie wide receivers in fantasy this year. And I know it sounds a little bit silly, and right now Tennessee is a mess. You could ask Cam Ward, he'll tell you themselves. They are playing like asphalt. And I do think that we are going to see changes in that offense that could help Io Manor see even more targets moving forward. But you don't want to start him right now. It's just like what we've been talking about. Slayton, Washington, those two wide receivers, I don't know if you're going to feel real comfortable starting Washington. Slayton, you might be as a number 3 type wide receivers, but they've got the playing time in front of them. They should have targets. Io Manor is like right next in line. He already has the playing time. It's the targets just not being big enough yet. He's still more of a touchdown or bust type of wide receiver, but somebody who could absolutely help you out as the season rolls along.
Some players that are easy to drop at this point: Calvin Ridley, Travis Hunter. Would you hang on to Matthew Golden through the bye?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so. Again, unless you're just desperate because of you have Golden and Tyreek or Golden and Neighbors and, bye weeks are killing you, then you got to make some tough calls. I think DJ Moore is going to be one of those guys that fantasy managers struggle with. Certainly Darnell Mooney is going to be somebody that, fantasy managers struggle with. These guys that you had high expectations for, certainly drafted in the case of a DJ Moore, in the first 5 or 6 rounds, and they're just not producing. Same thing with Ridley. Like, at some point you got to realize, they're not getting the job done. They're not going to play this week in the case of Golden and Mooney. So you just may have to make a tough call with your roster.
Tyquan Thornton you can drop. Marquise Brown you can drop. Christian Kirk you can drop. Josh Downs you can drop. And, I was going to ask about Jerry Jeudy, just that other injury is Cedric Tillman being out for a few weeks. Hang on to him, Jeudy?
I would. I mean, we saw this last year. The first 3 games of the season when they traded Amari Cooper, not of the season, first 3 games when they traded Amari Cooper, and in the midst of that, they made the quarterback change because of the injury to Deshaun Watson, so Jameis Winston stepped in. Tillman was the better producer, fantasy-wise, statistically, than Jerry Jeudy. Then Tillman had the concussion, and Jeudy took off at the end of the season, and it might give you some hope for David Njoku and maybe Harold Fannin Jr. as well. But look, the Browns' passing game right now is a joke. Joe Flacco really is struggling at this point. He's looking downfield way too much, and the run game has been fantastic. They didn't have that last year when the passing game was really working. So I do think Judy's worth holding on to. I'm not going to start Jerry Jeudy this week unless I'm desperate, but if he has a good week this week, especially, Tillman can miss the next 4 games because their bye, I believe, is week 9 or week 10. We're looking at a situation where Tillman could be out through their bye week, and so this is a big opportunity for Jeudy. I think it's week 9 is what
it is.
Buys.
Week 9.
So good opportunity for Jerry Jeudy to establish himself as a go-to guy, whether it's for Joe Flacco or Dylan Gabriel.
It's been an ugly start for Jeudy. He's averaging 7.5 targets per game and 7.8 PPR points per game. So if it's a smaller league, I say move on. If it's a deeper league, you want to see what this Browns offense looks like with him as the clear-cut number 1 target getter, then go ahead.
Okay, well, we're going to take a break and talk about some more Browns. Can you drop David Njoku and Harold Fannin right now? And also, which tight end should you pick up? How much are we buying into a guy who ran 10 routes but caught 2 touchdowns in his first game of the season? We'll be right back on Fantasy Football Today. Two touchdowns for Darren Waller, and now big shoes to fill as Tyreek Hill is out for the season. So are we rushing to the waiver wire to pick up Darren Waller? Are there any other tight ends? It seems like a decent amount of tight ends out there that might get you 7 or 8 points or something like that in a PPR league if you just need something this week, if you're dealing with a tight end who's on bye or an injury or whatever it might be. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. So let's get right into it and talk about the tight ends. And Darren Waller is your top tight end, Jamey. He wasn't obviously before Monday Night Football, but how much of it is the production, 2 touchdowns? How much of it is the Tyreek Hill injury that's boosting him as your tight end 1 on waivers?
Yes. Look, it's a path to success for him, and we saw last year Jonnu Smith top 2 in targets for the Dolphins. They altered their offense last year because of the offensive line concerns and Tua's health concerns of getting the ball out of his hands quickly. And Jonnu Smith averaged 13.1 PPR points per game. Darren Waller and Jonnu Smith are not exactly the same player. But you said this, Adam, when they signed Waller. Why can't he just do that? Why can't he be a short area target that can make some plays after the catch and be a focal point of this offense? And so we saw a glimpse of that with the 2 red zone targets and the touchdowns that he caught. And now there's no Tyreek Hill, average 7.7 targets per game for the Dolphins in the first 3 weeks of the season. So if there's going to be an opportunity for Darren Waller the runway is now clear. And so when we're looking at a position where you're trying to get high-end production, look, there's been a lot of failures at the position. Sam Laporta has been a little bit of a bust. Travis Kelce's obviously not playing at a high level. Evan Ingram, David Njoku, guys that were drafted as starting tight ends. T.J. Hockenson, like, you're looking for somebody to step up and fill that void. He's 14% rostered right now, and I would be shocked if it's not close to 80% by the end of the week, because we've seen some of these tight ends, they just haven't cracked close to 100. I mean, Dalton Kincaid's playing well. Juwan Johnson has been one of the best fantasy tight ends. Those guys are at 80 to 83%. Kyle Pitts was at 68% rostered on CBSSports.com going in or coming out of week 4. So there's not going to be, I think, every league is picking up Darren Waller, but if you need a tight end, especially with now there's no Tucker Kraft and there's no Kyle Pitts because of the bye weeks this week. Like, this is a great bye week replacement just to see what happens against Carolina defense that struggled against position. And if he stays healthy and can sort of be that replacement for Tyreek Hill, you're talking about a top 10 tight end rest away. So the opportunity is immense. I hope he stays healthy, and this is kind of what the Dolphins were hoping for, that he would fill that Jonnu Smith void.
Well, I also think he is a different type of tight end than Jonnu Smith. I think you talked about that, and he's definitely not the same type of pass catcher that Tyreek Hill is. But he still should see his playing time ramp up a little bit more. I especially like him this week against Carolina. Before you go and drop 30% of your fab on Darren Waller, know that after this week, he's got the Chargers, the Browns, the Falcons, and then I don't know what the Ravens defense is going to look like by the time he plays them. But those are 4 teams that do have players that can cover and shut down tight ends. So that does worry me a little bit. That's going to be a voice in the back of my head. But that's for future weeks. This week, I love the matchup against Carolina, and that's the number one reason why Waller should be the top tight end that you add off of waivers.
Carolina is giving up the 6th most fantasy points in PPR leagues to tight ends. Guys like Brenton Strange had a good game. Hunter Long caught a touchdown. Elijah Higgins had 45 yards. Hunter Henry had a long touchdown catch. Just terrible tackling on that. I wouldn't even call it tackling. Just watching. Hunter Henry really bore on that play. So Darren Waller does have that great matchup. We can talk about the other guys. And I'm wondering, actually, because wide receiver is so rough right now, I think you could start thinking about tight ends as flex options in some situations. Do you see anyone on waivers that strikes you as, if I already have a tight end that I know I'm starting every week, I'm still going to pick up Waller or Strange or Mason Taylor or whoever?
Definitely, but I don't know if it's because I want to start them as a flex. It might be just to have that second tight end on my team, to have somebody on my team who could evolve into being a top 12 tight end. And with that train of thought, I would actually lean toward Mason Taylor ahead of Brenton Strange. Strange is a great floor play. He's given us at least 10.5 PPR points each of the last 2 weeks, at least 9.9 PPR points in 3 of 4 games. At this point, with tight ends, that's pretty good. I just don't know how much ceiling he's got. Can he actually be a top 2 target getter in Jacksonville? The way that offense is structured right now, I would say probably not. But with Mason Taylor, I think he can be second on the Jets in targets behind Garrett Wilson. In fact, we just had a game where he was basically that, and he'd had double-digit fantasy points in PPR, and he's been playing 71% of the snaps or more every game this year. So the Jets offense was slowly bringing him along. He had this week 4 game against Miami. It was a very favorable matchup. This week he's got the Cowboys. It's another favorable matchup. Not that you're going to start Mason Taylor, but having him on your bench in case he evolves into being a startable fantasy tight end, I think you have to try and make that move. And you can probably do that with your second run of waiver claims, maybe 5 or 6% of your fab budget. Not everybody in your league will be as keyed in on him as they will be other players off the waiver wire.
So your question, Adam, was can we start them as flex options? I don't want to aim for 11 PPR points at flex. I want 11 PPR points at tight end if I'm struggling at that position, because that's going to put you in the top 10 range. If I'm looking for 11 PPR points at flex, I'm really shooting for guys that have so much more upside. So I would rather take a chance on a Darius Slayton, a Malik Washington, as somebody that has, the chance to really go off, as opposed to settling for 5 for 65 as, hey, that's a good day. That's a good day at that position, but that's not great as a flex play.
Other names on your waiver wire list: Tommy Tremble getting Miami, great matchup there. Dalton Schultz is at Baltimore, looks like a pretty good matchup given their defense. Theo Johnson for the Giants, he's at New Orleans. Jake Tongas, someone's going to have to catch passes for San Francisco. We don't have an update, but we're probably not expecting Ricky Pearsall. Juwan Jennings is going to be questionable as well. So, again, Jamey, those names are Tommy Tremble, Dalton Schultz, Theo Johnson, and Jake Tongas.
I just want to, Tremble real quick. You mentioned 8 targets, 5 catches, 42 yards, and a touchdown. Jatavion Sanders had been, a big part of what the Panthers were doing before he had his ankle injury. And they just had, in the game against the Patriots, 8 targets for Tremble and 2 targets for James Mitchell, their other tight end in that game. So clearly Bryce Young, without anybody else there aside from Teteroa McMillan, leaning on the tight ends. If you're going to get 10 targets to the position in a matchup against Miami and Tremble's the main guy there, he could be one of the best sneaky sleepers for this week just based on his opportunity.
He's always one of my favorite names in Halloween time. Dave, thank you for laughing when I trembled. Okay, your questions. My favorite part of the show, we get your questions from Twitter or X, whatever it's called, and your ad drop questions. We're going to read those when we come back on FFT. Couple of news items for you here before we get to your questions. First of all, Braylon Allen is on IR, so Isaiah Davis should have an increased role for the Jets. And the Browns released a depth chart. Their starting quarterback is Joe Flacco. All right, here's a question from Zach. I have the number 1 waiver priority. I lost Neighbors. Is anyone worth using that for?
It's not a receiver. It's Woody Marks. I would use it for him unless you are just absolutely loaded at running back. And even if you are, maybe before you use the waiver claim, you could make a trade involving Marks to get a wide receiver that is at least better than Jerry Jeudy. But say you get Marks with your first waiver claim, you can then set another waiver claim to potentially replace Jeudy with Slayton, with Wan'Dale Robinson, with Malik Washington, one of those guys.
Next, please. I need to pick up a quarterback in case Lamar doesn't play. He's not going to play, most likely. Should I drop Matthew Golden, Nick Chubb, or Bill for either Tua or Wentz?
If you're not playing either of the running backs, to me, it's Nick Chubb. There's still the potential that, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, Bill, is going to be the lead running back for the Commanders. Chubb is clearly getting phased out to whatever degree, and so I would drop Chubb and pick up Tua Tagovailoa.
It is frustrating in Washington with all 3 running backs playing basically the same amount of snaps. But, man, I think Krosky-Merritt looks terrific. And I hope – I just wouldn't drop him yet. I'd give it another couple of weeks if you can be patient.
Agreed.
All right. Next up, would you rather roster Malik Washington, Torrey Horton, or Darius Slayton?
We did answer this question on the show. The answer is Slayton. He is our favorite. Washington would be second on this list. Torrey Horton is interesting. He just doesn't get a lot of targets for the Seahawks. Could that change as the season rolls on? Sure, it could. But I'd rather have Slayton or Washington because I believe they're going to be in that 6 to, in the case of Slayton, 11 target range from week to week.
All right. Let's see what else we got. Thank you, by the way, everybody, for all these questions. Joreen says, is it time to drop DJ Moore and Calvin Ridley?
Ridley's easily droppable. Moore's a tougher call just because you hope that he gets more involved. But again, if you're looking at it right now, rest of season, would you rather have the number 1 receiver for the Giants, whoever that may be, whether it's Slayton or Wan'Dale Robinson, or maybe the number 2 or potentially number 3 guy for Chicago at this point? So if the choice is the only guy I could drop is DJ Moore to pick up Darius Slayton, I'm doing that.
I'm not. I'd rather have the number 2. Now, if I knew he was going to be the number 2 receiver, I'd rather have DJ Moore than Slayton. I don't know.
You sound like a disgruntled Giants fan.
No, come on. What is Darius Slayton really going to do? DJ Moore has had slow starts before. He has stretches. We know he has a lead upside when he's right. See if we have time.
Well, he's already not the number 1 receiver on his own team, and through 4 weeks, his season high is 12.8 PPR points.
Yeah, I don't want to start him, but I don't want to give him up for a guy like Slayton, who's probably going to be at best the number 3 receiver.
Do you know what Ridley's season high is for PPR points? 8.7.
8.1. Oh, so close. You know what? I was wrong, but I was close enough. I'm going to give myself the win there. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. That's it for the show. Check out the Fantasy Football Today podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts, or don't, whatever. I'm not going to beg you. We have episodes every day for you, though. Thanks to Dave Richard and Jamey Eisenberg and all of you for watching and listening. I am Adam Aizer. Have a great day, everyone. Go win your league.